there's a little bit of vegetation, but it's not major vegetation. So one of the things that, when we went on our trip before, we went to Badr, this battle site of the Battle of Badr. And it's about 100 kilometers southwest of Medina. So it's quite a distance. And I want you to look outside and visualize this, that is basically because we're heading due south right now. This is very similar to the terrain that the Sahaba marched through for days to get to the battle site of Badr. Now when you go to the battle site of Badr, you pass a place that has a well. And this well is unique because it said it's on a road called Tariqul Anbiya, the road of the prophets. And you stop at this well and everyone gets off and makes wudu, and there's a very simple, very humble masjid next to this, and people pray 2 rakat nafil there. But the reason this road is called Tariqul Anbiya is because it said that when Musa alayhi salam took Bani Israel out of the clutches of Fir'aun, when they crossed the Red Sea and they came into this part of the Hijaz, that they stopped at that place, at that well, and drank the water from that well and used it to refresh themselves. When the Prophet ﷺ was going, he stopped with his companions at that well, and they refilled their water skins and prayed at that place. That's why we stopped and prayed at that masjid. And it said when Isa alayhi salam, when Jesus the son of Mary returns at the end of time, he will stop on that road at that well and will drink the water from that well on his way to fight the Dajjal. So it's just something very interesting to think of the blessing of that place. And when you stop there and you look around, you think that the Sahaba were people of very meager resources. The Sahaba essentially, when they went to the Battle of Badr, and by reports we have that there were approximately 313 of them, most of the Sahaba did not have armor, and most of them did not have weapons. They were farmers. So many of them had shovels and axes. And so they went there, and when you get to the place of the Battle of Badr, we had like 3-4 busloads of people. And when you get off the place, it's massive sand dunes. Because by that point, these rocky dunes become sand dunes. And when you stop there and you get off, and I've told this to many people, that when we got off the bus, it was literally the hottest I've ever been in my entire life. I'd never been anywhere else in the world that was that hot. I've lived in Pakistan, I've lived in Egypt, been in Saudi, but the intensity of that heat was like unbearable. I mean, people literally like shabab, like young men and women were like about to pass out from the intensity of that heat. And when we're there, our shuyukh showed us the place that's the battle site of the Battle of Badr, which is now an orchard. It's a beautiful orchard. And there's a small cemetery there, and there's a monument that has the names of the shuhada, of the martyrs that fell on that day. And wallahi, one of the things that struck us when we were there was, our sheikh reminded us that the Battle of Badr took place in the month of Ramadan. And so when you put all of that together and you look at the fact that they marched out there in the month of Ramadan, and that they fought in the month of Ramadan, you know, while many of the Sahaba were fasting during that time, it just gives you a whole new appreciation for the mujahada, the struggle of the companions for the sake of this deen. And I'll tell you another incident related to the seerah from the Battle of Badr, about the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The night before the Battle of Badr, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was making dua all night. Like literally was weeping and dua all night, because the dua he was making, and it comes in the hadith, is that he was asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this community, to bless his group, his jama'ah, because if they perished, then Islam would have been wiped off the face of this earth. And so it was really an existential threat for them in that sense. And the Prophet ﷺ had stayed awake the entire night. And they fought the Battle of Badr the next day in the conditions that I was describing to you. That night, one of the Sahaba narrates that the Prophet ﷺ had appointed me to be a watchman over the prisoners of war that were taken from the Battle of Badr. And while I was waiting there, I saw where the Prophet ﷺ was trying to sleep, and he was restless. He was moving from side to side, and he went up to him. He said, "Ya Rasulullah, is everything okay? Is anything the matter?" And the Prophet ﷺ said to his companion that we're resting comfortably tonight. I'm worried. I have fikr for the state of our prisoners. And he said, "Ya Rasulullah, would you like me to go and check upon the prisoners?" And the Prophet ﷺ replied in the affirmative. So this companion went to where the prisoners were kept, and they were roped. Their hands and their feet were roped together. And he said, "I come," and he approached them and said, "I come, with the permission of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to check on your condition. Is everything okay?" And one of them spoke up and said, "Everything is okay, but our ropes are too tight. Can you please loosen them for us?" And then the companion loosened the ropes and then went back to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, just keep this in mind. In the narration, it says the Prophet ﷺ had stayed awake the entire night before, and had fought jihad fi sabilillah the entire day, and still couldn't fall asleep that night because of the concern he had for his enemy. And the Sahaba was narrating this as in complete, astonishment. That it was only after I went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him that they're taken care of, only after that did I see the Prophet ﷺ fall asleep. And that's important for us to keep in mind, because the age that we live in is an age in which, because of the massive disinformation about Islam and about the Prophet ﷺ, we have people that, put the most, the worst arguments attacking the character of the Prophet ﷺ, when they have no idea of the character of the Prophet ﷺ or who he was. And we live in an age, and we live in a society in which there's an argument in the best law schools and in the best courthouses of this country on the legality of torture, on whether it's ethically possible and permissible to have, our government sanction torture. And so all of this is just a reminder on, this is our challenge as people who follow, people from the Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people that espouse, his teachings, that endeavor to inculcate them in our lives, to live our lives according to them, that we have a massive challenge in front of us. This is a great affair we've been given of protecting Islam and of giving the best da'wah of Islam. And one of the ways is through the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's like Imam Khalid said when we arrived, is that the majority of the people in the subcontinent and in the non-Arab world, for that matter, the way they converted to Islam was not through the miraculous power of the Quran, because that's what won the hearts and minds of the Arabs. For the Ajam, for the non-Arabs, it was the people that they met that exemplified the character and the Sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ that won their hearts and minds. So the way Islam was spread through South Asia and through Southeast Asia, which is essentially more than half of the Ummah as we know it today, was through people who embodied the character of the Prophet ﷺ, to its highest levels, to its highest ideals. Something to keep in mind. And one other thing I'll tell you about the Battle of Badr, the place. It's a desolate land, right? But in the middle there's this oasis, which was the battlefield. And maybe there's a lesson there. But off to the side of it, there's a place that the historians say was the command center of the Prophet ﷺ. There was a woman who was very wealthy. And many years ago, she bought that land. And it was out in the middle of nowhere. She bought it and she converted, she put her own money, millions and millions of riyals, and made like a beautiful masjid. And so we went to that masjid and we prayed. And literally you're walking, when you walk off of the outside of the area of Badr, you're in like the furnace of hell. That's what it feels like. And when you walk into this masjid, the sakina, like the tranquility of this masjid, like literally the way it hits you at a physical level and at an emotional level, is that you've gone from one state to a completely different state. And I mean, may Allah bless this woman. I don't know who she is. I mean, her name isn't recorded, at least not publicly available. The fact that she made this a waqf, she made it an endowment for anyone to come, passerby in that community to come and pray there. And it's just an amazing reminder on, people, don't think any action is small, because there's people that will benefit from your actions long after you're gone. So I'll also recount to you the story, because I mentioned before that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said that I would trade all of the deeds of my life to have one day and one night in the life of Abu Bakr. And we talked about the night, which was the night that he was with the Prophet ﷺ in the cave of Hira, which inshallah we'll try to go to in Mecca if it's possible. The day that he was referring to was the death day of Rasulullah ﷺ. And in order to understand, you have to understand what happened before. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the surah that begins إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, when the Prophet when he recounted that surah to the companions in the masjid, all of the companions began to rejoice, because the surah says that the victory, the manifest victory, is at hand. It's very near, and you'll see people in multitudes, in throngs, entering into the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was coming to the Sahaba, and it hit them in a way that this is what they've been waiting for. These are the muhajirin that left their families, that left their property, that left their communities to form a new community that were now going back. And this was like their promise was coming true in that sense, the promise of Allah. And the Ansar, who had given up so much to support the Prophet ﷺ in Medina and to take in the muhajirin, this was like their iman was on a high, as we could say. But in the corner of the masjid, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was crying. And he was weeping bitterly. And it was later said that by Abu Sayyid al-Khudri radiallahu anhu, that Abu Bakr was the only person who knew what the meaning of that surah was. Because the tafsir of the meanings of that surah was that the death of the Prophet ﷺ was imminent. Because his mission was coming to a close. That all the work that he had struggled for and everything that he had given was now, coming to fruition. And so his death was literally on the horizon. And this comes very soon after the Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ. I forgot to mention that. If you fast forward a few weeks, you get up to the illness of the Rasulullah ﷺ. I'm not going through all of the specific details, but the Prophet ﷺ becomes very ill about 2 weeks or so before he dies. One day he comes out of his masjid and he addresses the community and he says, and he tells them the parable of a man who's been called to his Lord. And he can choose between this life or the next. And the man chooses the next world. And all of the Sahaba thought, wow, this is very profound. This is a man that, thinks he's a man of aql. He's a man of intelligence, choosing the hereafter as more beneficial than this world. And again, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is crying in the corner. And Sayyid Khurbi, who narrates this hadith, says, we thought to ourselves, what's wrong with this crazy old man? Why does he keep crying in the corner? And he says, later upon reflection, none of us understood what the Prophet was saying except Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Sayyidina Abu Bakr understood that the Prophet was telling his own story, in that he was telling him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had called him back, and that his servant, meaning himself, had chosen to go to Allah rather than remain in this world. So he knew that the Prophet had only days left in this world. And he was weeping because of that. And Abu Sayyid al-Khudri says that we knew that Abu Bakr was unlike any of us. That he was the closest of all of the companions to the Prophet because he understood things that none of us understood. And so when we get up to the there's a lot of details that I'm rusty on, but when you get up to the very end of the Prophet's death, when he's very ill in the last few days, he opens the curtain from his house that looks into the masjid, and we saw the wall that they share. He opens the curtain, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was leading the salah. And the Sahaba saw the curtain opening. Some of them saw it, they became very happy. And Abu Bakr saw it as well, and he began to step back. And the Prophet ﷺ gave him a sign, no, stay, you have to keep leading. And then he closed the curtain, and he was smiling. And Abu Bakr completes the salah. And there are several other times when the Prophet ﷺ appoints him to lead the salah. And they say that when they saw him smile, it was bittersweet for the companions, because they were happy to see a smile on the face of the beloved of Allah ﷺ, but they also knew what he understood by that. The Prophet ﷺ was smiling because when he looked at his jama'ah, he looked at his companions being led by Abu Bakr, he knew that his time was done. That Abu Bakr was meant to be the Khalifa after him, by the interpretation of that event. And the Prophet ﷺ, now I'm going to the very end of it, the Prophet ﷺ became very ill, and he was staying with Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. And one of the last instructions that he gave was the importance of salah to his ummah. So don't ever underestimate, don't ever forget the importance of salah, because it was one of the last things that the Prophet ﷺ was recounting to the companions. And when the Prophet ﷺ was in the house of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha on that morning, he was lying down in the lap of Sayyidah Aisha, and she relates that his head was lying on my chest. And my brother, who was named Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr, came into the room, and he had a miswak with him. And I saw the Prophet ﷺ look towards the miswak, and I said to him, Ya Rasulullah, would you like the miswak? And the Prophet ﷺ nodded his head. And so he gave her Abu Abdurrahman gave her the miswak, and it was too hard for the Prophet ﷺ to use. So she moistened it with her saliva, and then gave it to the Prophet ﷺ. And so one of the very last actions that he did before leaving this world was to use the miswak, which again gives us, should give us an understanding of the virtue of the miswak. Don't ever think it's a small sunnah, that it's a small thing that one can pass by. The Prophet ﷺ ultimately died between the time of Fajr and Dhuhr on that morning. It was a Monday morning, scholars believe, on the 12th of Rabi'ul Awwal, in the arms of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. Now when that happened, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was outside of Medina, because he had another house on the outskirts. And they sent a messenger to go alert him. And now when all of this was taking place in Medina, now I want you to understand this, on how beloved the Prophet ﷺ was to the companions. These are people that when their family would go to jihad, and they would be coming back from jihad, and this is well narrated, that they would be coming back from jihad, one of the women, her father, her husband, and her brother went for jihad. And she was standing at the edge of the outskirts of the city when